Without any delays, I'll start the presentation. So today's topic is going to be about inflation, and I know instinctively most, if not all of you, understand it and know what it is and how it affects your business as a professional practicing in the world of real estate. So, a lot of the stuff that we are going to be talking today was as a result of having consulted with your president, Eric Toro, as well as your LGLR chair and past president, Rick Bunyadi, and them agreeing to the fact that maybe a primer about inflation, because it's on the news lately uh, for as much as anything can be on the news, and the effects of it on our business and what have you. Now, most of the stuff that you are going to be seeing is compiled through publications like Wall Street Journal, Los Angeles Times, Daily News, Chicago Times, Sacramento Bee, and of course some of my texts from back in college. Because I'll be quite honest with you, a lot of this stuff was I had forgotten about. Part of my major was economics, and when I went back and put this report together for you, I learned a whole lot. So without any delays, let's start. You are seeing my screen that says inflation on it, yes?
Yes, we are.
Very good. So the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index today, is shy of 8%. This is the highest it has ever been for the past 40 years. I don't have to tell you this, you read about that in newspapers all the time. But mind you, I have to tell you that this is not the preferred measure that the Federal Reserve measures inflation. In fact, the measure that they use is PCE, or Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, and that stands at 6%. Regardless which one you look at, both are twice or a little bit more than what inflation was, or what the CPI was prior to the pandemic, which was about 3.5%. According to Bureau of Labor Statistics, real wages is down 1.7%. Why? Because if you have a wage growth of 6%, which is what it is, and you have an inflation rate of about 8%, the differential is the negative wage growth for our workers. Albeit we have a very, very strong labor market today. In fact, there is about 11.5 million jobs that are available, and 4.5 million have already quit the labor market. And that increases the inflation in the labor force, in the economy, which is a core component of the CPI, as is rent, as we will find out. Now, if you remember, there was a lot of talk that inflation was transitory. In other words, the pandemic, we're going to go through it, and supply chain distress and so forth, and all is going to be good. This narrative has stopped about 2.5, 3 months ago. Nobody anymore is talking about a transitory effect. In fact, everybody is thinking and knows that inflation is entrenched in the economy today. Is there a comparison between now and 1970s? From the youthful appearances of your faces, I can tell you none of you are as old as I am, and I lived through it when I was going to school in Baltimore in 1970s in the stagflation and so forth. We'll be talking about it and find out if there were or there are any similarities. We will also be talking about yield curve. If anything at all, this is what you need to take away from today's presentation. And it's going to be technical, but it's going to be very, very simple. Your executive team has asked me to simplify all of these concepts. So, as I said, instinctively you knew most of it, but we will provide it to you in layman terms. So perhaps you can use a nugget or two in your next listing agreement, or say a seller that is on the fence and you want to help them to jump on and sell the property. We will also be talking about what is it that future holds for us as far as inflation is concerned, and we'll start by defining what inflation is. By definition, a broad rise in prices will result in fall of your money's value, because that's what inflation does. So if prices rise, that's inflation, simple. And when they do, they erode the power of the purchasing of your money. A lot of times it has been dubbed as the dark underbelly of growth. We've had tremendous economic growth, and one of the side effects of the economic growth is inflation. And let me admit this, people. All right. Now, it's tale of many cities. Inflation is not the same as it is in Phoenix, for example, at 10.9% versus Los Angeles, which is at about 7.4%. Or if you look at Riverside, it's 8.6%. If you look at San Diego, it's 8.2%, or San Francisco at 5.2%. So different metro areas have different inflation rates. We are at 7.4%. Nationally, it is at 7.9%. What are the causes of inflation? Basically, when you have too much demand chasing too few goods, you are going to have inflation. Too much demand, too few goods. That's one cause. Consumers in today's inflation are flushed with money. In fact, there are estimates that the stimulus checks that were sent out, 30% of them have not been spent as of yet. And that amounts to trillions, a couple of $1 trillion. That also adds to the inflation. And of course, Federal Reserve's rate, keeping it low at the time of the pandemic, it increased the demand for goods such as washing machines or mortgages and so forth. That added to the inflation. Labor force. There are, as I said, about 11.4 million jobs available today. About 4 million laborers left the labor force, albeit they are returning little by little, which means they will be adding to the pressures of the inflation, right? So the labor force that already exists today, that is working, can demand higher wages. That's a very good position to have. Of course, energy prices, we are all aware of it. Gas prices at about $6 or $7 a gallon, and so forth. And now you got to understand that the Ukraine war does have an effect on this thing, but gas prices were on the rise way before the war started. And of course, supply chain the disturbances, whether it is, you've seen the pictures of ships at the Long Beach port waiting to offload and so forth, and laborers being short, and what have you. All of these effects and all of these contribute to the inflation that we have today. Now, let's talk about rent inflation. Los Angeles rents have increased by about 10%. This is in the past 8 to 12 months. Orange County by 17%, and Riverside by 18%. By the way, that has been the growth area in Southern California, if you didn't already know that. Nationally, though, the rents have increased by about 4.4%, according to the Labor Department. Used cars, trucks, fuels were up about 40% in comparison to about 12 months ago. Energy, 27% up. Electricity, 10.7% up. Higher inflation is probably costing the families, the average American family, about $250 a month as we speak. Now, who is feeling this more than others? The millennials, the Latinos, as well as the middle class. We know that inflation really hurts the working class, the middle class and the minorities more so than it does the wealthier folks in the economy. And a lot of people, according to Moody's, are suffering because of it. In fact, I was reading a poll yesterday, and most of the polls that are being done today refer to inflation as one of the top three major issues that Americans have or concerns that Americans have. Is this a 1970 redux? Now, as I said, you all look very, very young, but I remember in 1970s when inflation was at around 14.6% versus today, that is about 7.9%. Volcker, who was the Federal Reserve Board chair, increased the short-term rates up to about close to about 19 or 20%. He was successful by killing off the inflation, but along with it, sent us into a very, very deep recession, right? That followed those days. Are there any similarities between what we have today and what we saw in 1970s? Well, you could. There are some eerie similarities. Ukraine war today versus the Vietnam War in 1970s. Wage inflation, again, as we said, 6% higher than 12 months ago. And of course, who doesn't remember this? We used to stand in line to get gas from the gas stations. And at that time, it was the Arab embargo. And today, of course, is the oil prices that have gone up partially because of the Ukraine war. So there are some similarities. However, economists think that we are going to have a soft landing and that inflation will moderate after 12 months. But would it? I want to talk a little bit about yield curve. All you need to know about this thing is the following. The 10-year Treasury versus the 2-year Treasury. The 10-year today was at, and I've made a note on it, the difference between these two is 0.29% today. When investors require a higher yield on the short-term basis than long-term basis because the Fed is increasing through its monetary policy the rates, that is when the yield curve or the difference between the 10 and 2 inverts. In other words, because of the economy, because of the concerns, investors want more money on short term than they would normally do in a good and healthy economy. And what that does is basically it creates a good recession indicator. In fact, the Federal Reserve thinks that this inversion of the yield is a very good recession indicator. By the way, yesterday for about 23, 24 seconds, this yield was inverted. Now, I don't know if that is going to happen this time around or not, but I can share with you the chart. The bars that you see, the gray bars that you see, are all the recessions that we've had since 1980. Every single time, the yield has inverted. In other words, the 2-year bond has had a higher rate than the 10-year bond. This is exactly why they say that this is a very good indicator for the recession. In fact, since 1953, it's been so before every recession that we've had. Now, understand, this doesn't cause the recession. This indicates that there is a recession or economic slowdown on its way. And that's the talk in the past 2 or 3 days in or amongst the economists. Of course, CAR economists think that it's not conclusive, and the reason for that is because, as you can see, the rate for the 3-month yield is a little bit up, but the rate for the 10-year yield is coming down. And so this is why they say that it's not conclusive and it's sending some mixed signals. So what does the future hold after all of these? Well, let me go back to this yield, this chart, and invite you to consider. Remember, I said that if you've had sellers that have been on the fence, maybe this chart would help you convince them. Because if we are headed towards a recession, if it is true that we are headed towards a recession, it definitely is going to affect the values or the prices of the property that they're interested in selling. Or if you have a buyer that is on the fence, again, the same chart or the inflation expectations that has been rising can be used to show them that if the rates are going to go up, obviously the mortgage rate is going to be affected and going up. So therefore, I think these are some of the nuggets that you can use if you choose to in your presentations. First and foremost, the future holds the following. Federal Reserve's target rate is 2%. They want inflation to be at 2.25% in order to have a good balanced economy. Now, today we are at 7.8%, 9%. That's a 6% differential. You do the math. How many raises they are going to have in the next 6 months to a year? Is it going to be 4 or 5? Is it going to be at 0.25% each time or a half a point each time? Well, we have to wait and see. But this is where Fed is headed. They want a 2.25% inflation rate. They are also hoping for a soft landing. But is it possible? Well, Federal Reserve wants the unemployment to be at 3.5% and inflation to be at about 2% from 6%. That has not happened in the past 60 years. This, according to Larry Summers, which, by the way, was the only economist. And for those of you who don't remember the name, Larry Summers was the chief of treasury at the Clinton time, and about 9 months ago started ringing the bell that, folks, the inflation is not transitory. It's entrenched, and we need to do something about it. Of course, monetary policy always lags all kinds of recommendations like that. But the problem here is, as of today, in fact, we just got the report, that the expectations for inflation rising among consumers, albeit consumers are confident right now, but their expectations is that they will be, their expectations about the inflation is elevated tremendously, which means between 6 to 12 months from now, you are going to see perhaps even higher inflation. The yield inversion that I showed you, by the way, points to recession at worst, but at best to economic slowdown. These have political ramifications, and you have to be aware of it, and we will talk about that when we get that, and expect the mortgage rates to go higher. We are pushing the 5% already, but again, it will go higher than that. And usually a real estate sale is when a life event happens, whether it's a birth, death, expansion, move for a job, and so forth. All of these arguments can be used in order to construct and convince and convey to your clients. With that, my presentation ends at this point, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Do we have any questions for Greg? I don't see any hands up. Greg, as usual, your information is always so valuable to us. Certainly helps us in what we do, and I very much appreciate it. Thank you for bringing all of this information and making it more concise for those whose little brains are getting smaller. So I appreciate, as usual, your input. Thank you again. Thank you.
My pleasure.